Hello everybody and welcome to this recording of Dyslexia Scotland's presentation on dyslexia in the classroom. This is suitable for anybody who's supporting a student in education at the moment with dyslexia. This is a very fortunate time really for us to do this. Dyslexia Scotland just released their new strategic plan for the next 3 years, 2022 to 2025. If you're interested in more details of the strategic plan, these can be found on the Dyslexia Scotland website. The mission to a journey of a dyslexia-friendly Scotland is a very exciting one. It's a very great time to be doing this. And really what Dyslexia Scotland aims for is to achieve a dyslexia-friendly country that values all the skills and the talents of dyslexic people across the board. The mission, therefore, is to inspire and to enable people to reach their full potential, not just in life or in learning, but in the workplace as well. So more details of this very exciting strategic plan is over on the website for you to have a look at. Dyslexia Scotland are a national charity that want to work with you, especially in the education sector where sometimes you might feel overwhelmed by dyslexia, not quite sure what to do next. So you don't have to do this alone. Let Dyslexia Scotland work alongside you. In and amongst all the support that's available to you that's on the website as well, the leaflets are so succinct and so easy to access that it kind of stops you from having to do lots of research, looking everything up every time you need some form of information. The leaflets will guide you and they will also signpost you to perhaps some other further research that you might want to have a look at. The toolkit was built purely for the busy teacher. You're busy people, you've got lots and lots that you need to be doing day in, day out, lots of students to consider. So the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit is there as a very quick reference for you. Whatever your subject matter is, whatever you need to know, you can go to the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit and it will guide you through the early days. It will guide you through identifying dyslexia and what to do next as well, along with some strategies for support in literacy and numeracy. The 3 free training modules on the toolkit are an absolute gift to anybody in education now. It certainly gives you a fantastic overview of what dyslexia is, along with identification, and then of course how to support that all important part. Some of that we're going to be covering today. But if you wanted to take your time and look more in depth into dyslexia, then I'm going to point you straight towards the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit, where these training modules are absolutely free. The helpline is often the last resort for some people, but the Dyslexia Scotland helpline, that's generally open Monday to Friday each week, is there with trained staff on the other end, most of them volunteers, but very highly skilled people. Whatever your question may be, please just give them a ring and they will definitely point you in the right direction and get back to you as well with any other support or advice you might need. We know that there's been a lot of training and events going on. All of these events, again, are on the Dyslexia Scotland website for you to join in. They're all free to come along, most of them on Zoom at the moment. Some of them may be face-to-face at some point. But the training and the events give you that much broader scope of what dyslexia is, and equally puts you in touch with other people and how to work together. What is somebody else doing? Perhaps I could try that as well. The Mission Superheroes, if you've not had a look at that yet, take a delve into that. You can find any information again on the website about the Mission Superheroes. A great course to run in schools, very exciting for the children, definitely gets everybody motivated about what dyslexia is and the strengths and all the positive aspects that go with dyslexia. We're on the YouTube channel at the moment. There are other other presentations and workshops on here, spelling and reading individual ones, at home support for parents as well, if you're here as a parent and a teacher today. The education conference from last year, the pack is now available to purchase and watch online. Some fantastic speakers from last year's education conference. And let's not forget those volunteer branches. There are 19 volunteer branches across Scotland, people who are spending time with parents, time with educators to really support and share experiences, which is so very important for everybody. If you wanted to share some information with your students in your classroom, then the Dyslexia Unwrapped website is really created by our ambassadors, our young ambassadors who are actually up to the age of about 25, share their experiences on there of how to pass your driving test, exam techniques, study techniques. There's some incredible information on there. And for children, young children, to see others supporting each other, giving advice, and dyslexic themselves often really lifts that self-esteem. So as you can see, in an absolute nutshell, you've got all of the support that you need. You don't need to go off doing lots and lots of research. Straight to the Dyslexia Scotland website for all of the information you need to support your students in the classroom. So we're going to do this workshop in 3 separate parts, and we're going to take a break in between each one. We're going to start in part 1 by investigating dyslexia. How do we identify it? What are we actually looking for? In part 2, we're going to delve into how it actually feels. What are the characteristics? What barriers are our students facing in the school day? But also, what strengths are we going to try and nurture within our students? And the last section is going to be about support, how to tweak your current delivery, how to maybe think a little bit outside the box of accessibility for some of your students. So in between each of these sections, you're going to be encouraged to take a break before you come to the next section as well. So in part 1, investigating dyslexia, the thumbprint picture here is really quite significant, and it's something to keep in mind throughout all 3 parts of this workshop, because we know, I think, that dyslexia is very different in every single person. Dyslexia presents itself differently in age. As you get older, you develop more strategies, you understand yourself a little bit more, and the way that people sort of internalize their dyslexia and deal with this is very different as well. You also know that the support you're going to give your students is going to be very individualized, which does make it really hard work sometimes. But know that the student you're supporting is the expert. They know what they need from you. So let them talk to you and open that kind of conversation and investigation with them. The thumbprint's also very relevant because dyslexia can affect you differently every single day. And sometimes we get a bit confused why students can remember something on one day and perhaps not the next day. If we know that this is a characteristic of dyslexia, that we might have to use overlearning, we might have to use repetition in the way that we teach our dyslexic students, then perhaps we'll get used to that kind of way of presenting, if you like. So the thumbprint is something to keep in mind all the way through here. You might be watching this today because you're thinking of a particular student, and therefore we need to understand that not everything we cover today is going to be relevant to every student that you meet, but some of it will hopefully give you some light bulbs and give you some direction of how to support your students. So we're really lucky at this moment in time that dyslexia is one of the most highly researched learning difference. And the information that's coming into us now can be quite overwhelming, but the science is also a gateway. We know more and more and more about dyslexia, and we're really lucky that this is happening. And in some ways, we're still a bit confused by everything. We're maybe a little bit scared to move forward if we've identified dyslexia. Today, we want to give you the confidence to move forward once you've identified that some form of strategy needs to be put in place. I think the statistic of 1 in 10, we need to sort of take a real check on what this means. It means that every time you step into a classroom at the beginning of a new school year, that there will be a student in there with dyslexia, if not 1, 2, or 3, depending on the size of your class. So be prepared to adapt what you do to suit the whole class. The changes that you make to suit maybe 1 or 2 people is going to suit everybody else anyway. So be in that frame of mind that every time you step into your new school year, that you will be supporting children with dyslexia, whether they know they're dyslexic or they're not. The science is giving us lots of gateway to work out how to support, what strategies to put in place. We know that the dyslexic mind is differently wired. That's quite a hard concept to get around. What does differently wired actually means? A different way of processing, a different way of storing information. But different doesn't mean any less. That's one thing we need to get sort of understood here, is that differently wired doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that processing is done very differently. The brain imagery that we're being given at the moment is fantastic. It's huge. It's all over social media. They're and in YouTube, all these wonderful lighting up areas of the brain when children read, what's lighting up, what isn't lighting up. It's giving us this real great gateway of how to delve into the science of reading and the science of spelling and give that explicit instruction to children. Neuroplasticity is telling us we can change the brain. We can mold the brain to learn, to light up, to build all those neural pathways for the spelling and the reading that is so vital. We know we can mold it through various activities. And the last 2 points, I think, are probably the most pertinent, or some of the most pertinent on here, in fact, that we know that dyslexia runs in families. And we've known that for a number of years now, but if we take stock of what that actually means, it means we can start looking earlier. We can start looking in siblings, actively looking for dyslexia much earlier than perhaps we have done in past decades. So the co-occurrence as well. Sometimes the reason I bring co-occurrence up is because sometimes dyslexia can be hidden under other types of neuro difficulties, if you like. So the co-occurrence is quite a vital one if we think about neurodiversity. So dyslexia can often co-occur with something else. It very rarely sits by itself. So take, for example, dyslexia and dyscalculia. Dyscalculia, difficulty with numbers. We have ADHD on here, we have autism, etc. So dyslexia can sometimes sit very calmly underneath and perhaps not be identified. Something else could take over on the top. The ADHD or perhaps the autism diagnosis becomes the prominent, and therefore the dyslexia can get forgotten and hidden underneath. So not that we're looking for lots and lots of labels, we're looking to see what a child's neurodivergent profile is. Look to see what you need to support. What does that child need? What is that child's strengths? What are those child's barriers? What can I do to bring all that together to support and knock down those barriers? So neurodiversity is a fairly, well, it's actually was coined in the 1980s, so it's been around quite a while, but it's actually becoming very up and coming at the moment, especially in the workplace. So neurodiversity is something to embrace and something maybe to have a little bit of a look at, investigate what neurodiversity is. But we're looking at dyslexia alongside other learning differences as well. Okay, so I think it's really relevant at this point to start to spread this message, because if I'm frank, children at the moment, some children with dyslexia, not all of course, remembering our thumbprint as we go through, some children still feel that they're stupid. And I don't like that word, nobody likes that word, but the word is still being used. There's still this stigma sitting around what dyslexia is. And if you were to ask a young child, which I've done very recently, I've asked a number of children what their first reaction is to what is dyslexia. And their first reaction is that they cannot read and write very well. They find reading difficult. They may never be able to read. The first reaction has always been a very negative sentence. We need to change that. We need to shift that mindset. And this statement here is really quite bold and very, very true, that dyslexia's got absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. It is simply a different way of processing information, which essentially means that sometimes the classroom environment doesn't suit the dyslexic brain or the way the dyslexic brain is wired. So we need to be getting this message across to our children, whether this is on a poster on your classroom wall or a discussion, whichever way suits yourself, of course. But this is a really important message we need to get across, and we need to get rid of this stigma that dyslexia is a negative. Dyslexia is a different way of processing information. Because if you start looking at the strengths, we do talk about superpowers with young children. I know that that's a great analogy to use. If we delve down into what a skill set is and what a skill set looks like, it actually looks like an application form for a job. There's lots of skills in there, some of them inherent, some of them developed because of the dyslexia. And if you look at that top line and think about some of the students in your class, does that actually relate to anybody you can think of? The perseverance and the determination is something that I've always respected in the young children that I work with. That determination to do something, to achieve, yes, it means you've got to work harder. And that becomes almost the norm in some children. Some children know they've got to work harder, but the perseverance to get there, to get to where their peers are, and that determination, that compliancy when they're in the classroom. Now, I know not all young children are compliant. I know that sometimes the frustration that dyslexia can bring may turn out in some form of behaviours that aren't acceptable. However, some children with dyslexia are very compliant and extremely hardworking. And that's something we have to keep a real eye on, because we don't want that hardworking nature to turn into sort of self-induced pressure. We want children to be determined and be perseverant and hardworking, but we also want to make sure they're doing it for all the right reasons. There's a resilience in there. There's a good way of being able to communicate. Often many children with dyslexia are very articulate. They may not enjoy standing up and doing public speaking when they're younger, but as they grow and realize that actually I can speak really, really well, it becomes more of a gift than a barrier in the early years of school. Lots of children very personable, very empathetic, very very perceptive of other people's feelings and are they okay? Are they sad? Do I need to go and ask if they're okay? Do I need to help them? And all of the other things that you see on here is what the future employers are looking for. That leadership, that thinking outside the box, seeing the world differently, seeing the big picture. Now, this skill set here is something that we need to be sharing with our young people and getting children to identify what their own strengths are. You could do that as an activity in the class, maybe as a light bulb theme or a mind map theme, whatever suits your classroom. But this is important because it is in effect the strengths of the dyslexic mind or the individual that is in the end going to support the weaknesses. So we need to be looking and identifying and sharing what the skill set of our young people are. Identifying dyslexia is difficult. We're not going to take that away from anybody. It requires a lot of holistic evidence gathering. It requires everybody looking in from all corners, thinking, well, why is this happening? Why does this child need longer to do something? Why haven't they finished that exam paper in time? All of these things is a wonderful evidence gathering process. And every school, every council will have their own way of the evidence gathering pathway. If we're not sure of what to do, then the toolkit, the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit, gives you the way to identify, gives you that pathway. And it's something we've not historically had, is where do I start? Where do I go next? Where do I get support? If you follow the identification pathway in the toolkit, then that will give you a strategy of what to do next, step by step. We want you to discover and identify dyslexia as early as possible. We've always asked for that, and it's quite a tall order in a way. It's not always physically possible, and the reason is that many people, many children, will put in so many compensatory strategies from the early days that it's often masking the dyslexia. And again, this may send off a little light bulb for you and some of your students at the moment. And so you don't need to feel necessarily guilty that you didn't discover somebody as being dyslexic, but equally look at what strategies they're using. Some children may get up to primary 7 and they put in so many wonderful strategies for reading, perhaps visualizing words, that it's always been masked all the way along. So we need to be looking at all of the corners, all of the characteristics of dyslexia, and seeing where they fit. What methods of identification have I got? What holistic evidence am I gathering? Waiting can have repercussions. Sometimes we offer a wait to fail model, and we don't want to do that anymore. We don't want to wait till primary 3 to see if they get better, to see if the reading improves. Let's just support what we see right now. And let's not wait for somebody to fail before we start putting the support in. Because sometimes waiting to put that support in means that that child has put in a lot of compensatory strategies, but not all of them are going to be efficient. So we want to get in as early as we can and break all those bad habits, if you like, and break the mold and support what you see as early as you can. Now, the evidence of looking for each stages of dyslexia, again, are in the Addressing Dyslexia Toolkit, from the early years to the middle and the later years. It's all in there for you. I think that the parental intuition is probably one of the biggest pieces of evidence you're going to get. And many stories we hear are of parents who felt something in the very early years of school, have gone into school, and we've adopted that wait to fail model. And then we get to primary 7, and there's a lot of work to undo before we start supporting somebody. So my advice would be, if a parent does come in to see you, that it's a real trigger point to actually action and do something and start that holistic evidence gathering process. Parents see things at home that you don't see at school. They see differences in behavior. They see a child losing their self-esteem. They hear the comments. A child is not necessarily going to tell you those kind of things themselves when they come into the classroom, because they want to prove themselves to you. They want to please you generally. So take that parental meeting, that comment from the parent, I'm not quite sure what's going on. We have dyslexia in our family. What do you think? Then take that as a huge piece of evidence to move forward. At the end of the day, we're supporting what we see anyway. That's what the curriculum in Scotland is for. That's what GovEx's all about. So we're supporting what we see. But sometimes a label is not the nicest of things to call it, but labeling what dyslexia is, or identifying dyslexia, can open doors. And what it opens doors to is early support, the right kind of support, but it also opens that door to supporting self-esteem. When you know why something is happening, why you're finding things a little more tricky than your peers, then opening that door and explaining why, because dyslexia, because all of these things, because you're wired differently, you think differently, then it's huge. It's absolutely huge in the support of self-esteem. And that's one of the biggest barriers to learning. And that's something we're going to talk about in the next section. So now time to take a break, a 15-minute break, and we'll come back to part 2 in a short while. Thank you very much.